Mark chapter 14, verses 17 to 72. When evening came, Jesus arrived with the 12. While they were reclining at the table eating, he said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me." They were saddened, and one by one they said to him, "Surely you don't mean me?" "It is one of the 12," he replied, "one who dips bread into the bowl with me. The Son of Man will go just as it is written about him. But woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born." While they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take it, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank from it. "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many," he said to them. "Truly I tell you, I will not drink again from the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God." When they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. "You will all fall away," Jesus told them, "for it is written, 'I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered.' But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee." Peter declared, "Even if all fall away, I will not." "Truly I tell you," Jesus answered, "today, yes, tonight, before the rooster crows twice, you yourself will disown me 3 times." But Peter insisted emphatically, "Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you." And all the others said the same. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death," he said to them. "Stay here and keep watch." Going a little farther, he fell to the ground and prayed that if possible the hour might pass from him. "Abba, Father," he said, "everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will." Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. "Simon," he said to Peter, "are you asleep? Couldn't you keep watch for 1 hour? Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." Once more he went away and prayed the same thing. When he came back again, he again found them sleeping, because their eyes were heavy. They did not know what to say to him. Returning the 3rd time, he said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Enough! The hour has come. Look, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer." Just as he was speaking, Judas, one of the 12, appeared. With him was a crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders. Now the betrayer had arranged to signal with them. "The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard." Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, "Rabbi," and kissed him. The men seized Jesus and arrested him. Then one of those standing near drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. "Am I leading a rebellion," said Jesus, "that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I was with you, teaching in the temple courts, and you did not arrest me, but the scriptures must be fulfilled." Then everyone deserted him and fled. A young man wearing nothing but a linen garment was following Jesus. When they seized him, he fled naked, leaving his garment behind. They took Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests, the elders, and the teachers of the law came together. Peter followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. There he sat with the guards and warmed himself at the fire. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death, but they did not find any. Many testified falsely against him, but their statements did not agree. Then some stood up and gave this false testimony against him. "We heard him say, 'I will destroy this temple made with human hands, and in 3 days will build another, not made with hands.' Yet even then their testimony did not agree." Then the high priest stood up before them and asked Jesus, "Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you?" But Jesus remained silent and gave no answer. Again the high priest asked him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" "I am," said Jesus, "and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." The high priest tore his clothes. "Why do we need any more witnesses?" he asked. "You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" They all condemned him as worthy of death. Then some began to spit at him. They blindfolded him, struck him with their fists, and said, "Prophesy!" And the guards took him and beat him. While Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by. When she saw Peter warming herself, she looked closely at him. You also were with that Nazarene Jesus," she said. But he denied it. "I don't know or understand what you're talking about," he said, and went out into the entryway. When the servant girl saw him there, she said again to those standing around, "This fellow isn't one of them." Again, he denied it. After a little while, those standing near said to Peter, "Surely you are one of them, for you are a Galilean." He began to call down curses, and he swore to them, "I don't know this man you're talking about." Immediately the rooster crowed the second time. Then Peter remembered the words Jesus had spoken to him. "Before the rooster crows twice, you will disown me 3 times." And he broke down and wept.
Thanks, Chloe. Well, good evening, everybody. Hello. It's great to see you here at church tonight. Welcome. We're thinking about a time, or perhaps a few times, maybe many times in our lives, where we've wanted to stand for a good friend and support a good friend, but we let them down. That's what we're thinking about tonight. As we think about standing up for a friend, someone we love, someone we want to support, someone we want to stick by, and we let them down, I want to ask you to have a think about when has that been a time for you? Now, Sarah, my wife, my lovely wife, 16 years, is my best friend, right? She's a good friend. She's someone I love. And so let's lock this away. Sarah, my beautiful wife, is a beautiful woman, right? She's the most beautiful woman in the world. She just had a birthday yesterday. I love her very much. And I'm telling you this for a reason, right? I'm telling you this for a reason. This morning, Sarah was here. She runs the morning band. Most of you know Sarah from when she ran the night band here, yeah? You remember Sarah? You know Sarah? Yeah. We love Sarah, right? We love Sarah. Years ago, before we had children, when we were married just for a few years, I used to have a job in the bank. I had a career in the bank, and I worked at a bank branch. I managed a branch over in Morningside. You know, the Combsley Shopping Centre there, just behind the railway there. A busy little shopping centre. And at this time, we only had one car, and Sarah was heavily pregnant with our first child, Joshua, and some of you know my son Joshua. And on this occasion, I was waiting for Sarah to pick me up from work, and I'm looking at my watch because she's running late. I'm thinking, where is Sarah, you know? And when I say that Sarah was heavily pregnant, I mean she was heavily pregnant. Okay? She was heavily pregnant. And she was really big. And you know, we're talking this morning, we were sharing this morning for everyone while they're here. You know, Sarah would say, and of course I could never say this, but Sarah used to say she was as big as a house with Joshua, right? She was as big as a house. She was huge. Right? And so Sarah's there, and she comes to pick me up. Sorry, is that inappropriate? Chris, is that inappropriate? Maybe a little. Sarah was big. She was tired. She'd had a big day. She was exhausted. She's come to pick me up, and she arrives at the door of the branch. I come out to see her. I'm thinking, where's she been? She's run late, and she's weeping. Right? She's distraught. And I'm saying, Sarah, what's going on here? What's wrong? And she says to me, well, she explains what's happened in the car park. It's Thursday night. It was a busy time, 5:30. It's acid hour. And she tried to find a car park. For 10 minutes, she tried to find a park. She finally found one close to the branch. But then just as she's driving in, some guy hooned in and cut her off and took her car park. And so then she had to spend another 10 minutes circling around the car park, and then she eventually found one way over the other side. She's just walked a few hundred metres to come and get me, and she's distraught. She's exhausted. She's dropped a bundle. Now, I don't know if you can imagine how I'm feeling at this point. I'm starting to fume. This is my wife, my beautiful, darling wife, and she's heavily pregnant. You know, she's struggling here, and she's upset. And someone has wronged her. And boy, I'm going to take a stand. Now, of course, being the really sensitive, tender husband I am, knowing that my wife is exhausted, she's tired, she just wants to go home, I say to her, with all the love and tenderness I can gather, right, where did he go? And I drag her across. She says, oh, I think he went into Coles. So, right, we're going to Coles. So I drag my wife into Coles. And we check out aisle 1. He's not there. And so then we walk to aisle 2 and he's not there. And so we walk to aisle 3 and he's not there. We go all the way through and eventually we find him down in aisle 13, right down the very back, the last aisle. I've dragged Sarah along and here he is. I see him peeking into the freezer getting some ice cream or something. And this guy, I look down and I realise he's built like a house. He's huge. And he's full of muscles and he's covered in tats and black and leather. It's all going on. And at that point, for some reason, I suddenly realised that Sarah's idea that we just go home would be a really good idea. And so I grabbed my wife's hand and I was like, come on, let's go. Off we go. Now, I don't know what to do with that, but my wife, the person I love, the one I wanted to stand firm for, I did not. I wilted at the last moment. I didn't go and give that guy a piece of my mind just like I'd sworn I would. You see, today we're in Mark's Gospel. We're coming to the climax of his account about Jesus' life. Jesus' friends, they really want to stand firm for Jesus. They do. And as we've been following along these disciples in the story, we've seen that they've become compelled to follow Jesus. That Jesus is compelling, isn't he? And we've been watching along and we've been invited to become disciples of Jesus in the story. And we want to stand firm for Jesus, don't we? We want to be faithful friends to Jesus. But what we're going to see in the story as we zoom into chapter 14 is that all sorts of people are taking a stand and wanting to take a stand and do take a stand when it comes to Jesus. Jesus, we discover, will be the last man standing. And in this gospel, in Mark's gospel, as we've been enjoying this story, this biography about Jesus, we've seen this invitation for us to watch and listen and follow him. We've seen all people take stands when it comes to Jesus. And tonight we're going to see that some of the people who have been going toe-to-toe with Jesus in the story, they finally take a stand. We see others who take a stand, who want to take a stand. They really desire to take a stand. People like Peter and Jesus' friends. And we're going to see that Jesus, he's the last man standing. Now we start off in the story in chapter 14 with the Passover. And we've heard a bit about the Passover tonight, yeah? This ancient meal of remembrance. And here we are at the Passover meal, and it's like in Mark's Gospel, he's zoomed in and he's slowed down time to focus in. And in a story which has been fast-paced, action-packed, immediately this happened, and then this person did this, and this bloke said that, and Jesus responded this way, and wow, who is this man? Even the wind and the waves obey him. We're drawn into the story, but now we slow down. There's big stuff up ahead. It's just before the climax. Passover meal, what Mark is doing, he shows us at the start of this chapter two stories side by side, if you like. Everyone's making preparations. We've got the Jewish leaders, the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They're scheming to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him. They're making preparations for one death. We see the disciples, Jesus' friends, making preparations for another death, for the death of the Lamb, the Passover. And we see these two stories, they're all coming together. All the threads in Mark's Gospel are coming together for the climax. Two stories, both leading to one death. Two lots of preparations, both leading to the same death. And here's Jesus. He's with his friends. He's with Peter and James and John, these guys who started to get to know and relate with. And he's sharing a meal with them, the Passover meal. And Jesus, they're eating together. And Jesus stands up and he takes the bread and he gives thanks to God for the bread and he breaks it. And as he's breaking it, he gives it to his friends. He gives it to them and he says, take it, this is my body. And then he took a cup, and when he'd given thanks for the cup, he prays to God again, he gives it to his friends. And they all drink from the cup together. And then he says, this is the blood of the covenant which is poured out for many, he says to them. Now, what's Jesus doing here? He says, we sit and receive the Lord's Supper tonight. Soon we're going to enjoy that together tonight, this meal of remembrance tonight. It's like Jesus is taking this ancient meal of remembrance that looked back and to the great rescue, God's rescue of his people from slavery in Egypt. And what Jesus is doing is reinterpreting this meal to make it all about the future. In fact, the next couple of days when he's going to go to the cross and when he's going to die, he's taking this meal and making it all about that. And so when Jesus says, "This is my body, take it," he gives it. He wants them to eat it. When he says to them, "This is my blood, which is poured out for you, poured out for many," he's showing that he is the one who's going to stand firm through to the end. He's going to be faithful. He's making a promise to his disciples that he'll come through for them, for his friends. He knows that this is going to be the place where his body will be broken for them and where his blood will be poured out for them. And so they enjoy this meal together, Jesus and his friends. And after the Passover, after they celebrate it, they go out up to the Mount of Olives, and they're on the way, and Jesus is talking with his disciples, and you heard what Peter says to Jesus, right? He says, "I'm going to be faithful to you, Jesus. I'm going to stand firm with you, Jesus. I'm going to stick with you, Jesus. You know, even if everyone else flees, I will not flee, Jesus. I will never, ever disown you, Jesus." And so they go to the mountain and they're heading towards this Garden of Gethsemane, and everyone else has been making preparations, but now it's Jesus' turn to make preparations. He's preparing his followers for what's up ahead. And so he sits some of them down and he tells them to pray, and he takes James and John and Peter a little bit further with him. And then he gets them to watch and pray, he says. And then going on a little bit further by himself, it's at night, remember, it's dark. They're in a garden at Gethsemane. He's on his own, Jesus, by now. And we read in the story, we're meant to be seeing, this is a very different picture from the day just a few days earlier when Jesus arrived in Jerusalem with the crowds cheering and the songs singing and everything happening. And here is Jesus, he's on his own and it's dark. He falls to the ground and Jesus prays. And what does he pray for? He prays to his Father in heaven, if possible, that the hour might pass from him. He's feeling the pressure, he's feeling the pinch. Is he going to stand firm for his friends, this Jesus? He cries to his Father in heaven this really tender word about Father, Abba, Father, this word for Dad. He says, "Dad, Father, everything is possible for you. If possible, take this cup from me. If there's any other way, can it happen?" And Jesus, in this moment of temptation, this great trial for him, what sort of friend is Jesus going to be to those he promised to be a friend for? Well, he decides to stand firm. He gets on his knees. He submits to his Father. He says, "Yet not what I will, not what I want, but what you will, Father, what you purpose, what you decide." And so he doesn't fail to stand firm at all. He prays to his Father in heaven despite the anguish and the sorrow. Mark tells us Peter and the other guys, they look at Jesus and they realise how distressed Jesus is. Can you imagine the pressure? The great stress of his relationship with his own Father and what's about to happen in the cross the very next day. And Jesus is in the garden and he's praying to his Father and he stands firm. In his suffering, he doesn't fail to stand firm. Now, what about us in our suffering? Do we pray like Jesus? In our suffering, in our trials, in our temptations, do we stand firm like Jesus? Because he certainly encouraged his disciples to do that, hasn't he? He sat them down and taught them to pray and to watch and to pray as to what's coming up. And Peter and James and John, watch and pray, he says. He wants them to stand firm with me. But he's on his own and he stands firm. But is that how we stand firm when the pressure's on and when we're weary and we're tired, when life's tough and we're suffering and we're going through anguish and grief? Is that how we pray to our Father in heaven, the one who loves us? Yet not my will, but your will be done. Well, I don't know about you. I know about me. I don't stand when I need to stand. When the pressure's on, I fail to stand. Even for my friends, even for those I love, even for my best friend, I can fail to make a stand. The good news of the gospel is that we have one who stands firm for us. As we receive the Lord's Supper tonight, it's not about us standing firm for Jesus. No. We don't stand firm for Jesus. The point is, he stands firm for us. The good news of the gospel is we have a friend like Jesus who doesn't fail. And if we're feeling the pinch, when we're feeling the pressure of the times in our lives when we do fail, well, we can remember we're in good company, right? You know, Peter, he fails to stand firm for Jesus. He doesn't pray over and over again. He doesn't pray, we're going to see. He doesn't stand firm for Jesus. You know, I had lunch with a guy this week. I had some bacon and eggs. It was a beautiful lunch. Enjoyed talking. He's a growth group leader in our church, faithful young man, godly guy, servant heart. He said, Dave, this term, you know, with our growth group, as we've been reading the gospel, it's like we're meant to be associating with Peter. We can really sympathise with him. I'm saying, yeah, mate, that's the point. Mark wants us to see that we're like Peter. We're just like Peter. Peter's just like us. Well, how's Peter like us? How are we like Peter? Well, what happens with Peter? Jesus comes back to Peter after he's been praying. Simon, he says to Peter, are you asleep? Like, this guy's the guy who's meant to stand firm. He can't even stay awake. Couldn't you just keep watch for just 1 hour, says Jesus. And Jesus encourages him, watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. But again, Jesus comes back a little later. He comes back, he finds them sleeping again. Their eyes are heavy. He comes back a third time a little later on. Are you still sleeping? Are you still resting? Enough. The hour has come. Time's up. The clock stopped ticking. It's no more 3 minutes to midnight. We're here. The hour has come, he says. The Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. And you heard in the story, you heard in the reading from Chloe, and you heard from Peter, as he shared with us tonight, how Judas comes out of the bushes. He comes up and he's got this motley crew of thugs with him, these soldiers. And how does he go in for the kill with Jesus? He goes in with a kiss. You know, one of Jesus' disciples, one of his friends, who comes in with a kiss. The betrayer, he betrays Jesus with a kiss. He goes in for the kiss. It's like a kiss dripping with irony, isn't it? He betrays Jesus. What happens to Jesus' friends? Do they stand firm with him? No, they all run. They all flee. James and John, they're gone. Peter, tail between his legs. Off he goes. And Jesus is the last man standing, you see. And they take Jesus away and they take him to the house of the high priest. And here they're bringing all sorts of charges against Jesus. It's a hastily cobbled sort of court. It's a kangaroo court. It's a bit of a joke. It's a bad joke. It's a show trial. It's a sham. And there's the witnesses that they've obviously stitched up to tell these stories, that they can't even get their story straight, right? And so then the high priest, on behalf of the Jewish leaders, he finally takes a stand. He stands up, he looks Jesus in the eye. The high priest stood. And he asks Jesus, aren't you going to answer to these charges? What's this testimony that these men are bringing against you? And Jesus is very wise here. He doesn't respond. He's not going to play their games. He's not interested in this rubbish. But then the high priest asks a good question. He asks the right question. It's the question we've been waiting for, to hear Jesus' answer on his lips. The answer we've known right from the very first verse, right? Remember the start of the gospel? How do we start? Mark comes out, he says, this is the gospel. This is the good news about Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God. Well, here we are. The high priest says to Jesus, are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? Are you the Messiah, the Son of God? And now we hear Jesus. I am, he says. I am the Messiah. And Jesus signs his own death warrant. And how stoked the high priest must be. On the words, the lips of Jesus himself, he says, I am the Messiah. And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. Jesus is standing firm. Once again, he stands firm in the face of people standing against him, right? he stands up to these guys and he declares his identity out in the open. I am, and he knows the consequences. He knows where this is going to go to. Jesus, can you see yet? He's the last man standing. He's the faithful man who stands for his friends. And he stands up and he stands against the one who stands against him. But he talks about sitting in the future. You notice what he says? You will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. He's talking about what he's going to go through. It's all going to be achieved. There'll be a time when it will be finished. It will be done. He's speaking the language the high priest will understand when he will sit down, having delivered his people from slavery to sin. Jesus, the Messiah, will sit down at the right hand of the Blessed One, the Mighty One. You see, he's a faithful friend, Jesus, faithful to his friends who don't stand for him. But what's going on with Peter? Where's Peter? What's he been doing? You know, he fled in the garden. Well, Peter, he's been following along at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. And then we discover that Peter, while Jesus is upstairs, Peter's downstairs in the courtyard. While Jesus is upstairs taking a stand for his friends, Peter's downstairs. And what does he do? He takes a seat with the guards. A seat with the guards, and Jesus is upstairs. It's all hotting up at the trial. Peter's downstairs. He's warming himself by the fire. And again, we've got these two stories going on. And we're meant to be understanding one in light of the other. Why is Mark doing this? Why is Mark showing us these two different aspects of the story? Well, so we can see the comparison between Jesus and Peter, Jesus and his friends. You see, have you noticed yet? 3 times already in this chapter, Jesus has stood firm for his friends. At the Passover, he stood up for his friends and said, I'm going to stand for you. In the Garden of Gethsemane, in his temptation, he stands by kneeling before his Father and submitting to his Father in heaven. And thirdly, before the high priest and the Jewish leaders, he takes a stand. He stands firm for his friends. But what about Peter? Not once, not twice, but 3 times he failed to pray with Jesus. And then here, while he's warming himself at the fire, not once, not twice, but 3 times he denies Jesus. He disowns Jesus. He washes his hands of Jesus. I never knew him. I got nothing to do with that guy. In fact, you heard in the reading, he calls down curses. He wants to be so disassociated with Jesus. And then immediately, the rooster crows the second time, and Peter remembers the words that Jesus spoke to him. Before the rooster crows twice, you will disown me 3 times. And how does Peter respond? He breaks down and he weeps. He breaks down. One of those who received the bread broken for him becomes a man broken down. A broken man who's received broken bread. And so Mark is showing us these 2 stories, these 2 aspects of the story of the account of Jesus' life, so we can understand that although we're like Peter and we don't stand for Jesus, Jesus stands for Peter. Jesus does stand for us. Jesus is a man who loves his friends and who stands firm to the end for his friends. He is the last man standing. No matter what the consequences for him, where even when it includes him going to the cross and honouring his promises to his friends, to be the one whose body is broken for them, and to be the one where his blood is poured out for them. And say, in a moment, we're going to sit and enjoy the meal. We're going to receive, and we're going to stay seated. It's going to be brought to you and given to you. It's a symbolic way. It's how we remember what Jesus has done, isn't it? We're going to drink and enjoy and share and encourage each other. You know, there's a guy called Martin Luther. You may have heard of him. We talk about him quite often. And he made this famous statement. He was a man who failed his friends on different occasions. He stuffed things up in his life sometimes. But he understood what the gospel's all about. Jesus the Messiah. And he says, we are all just beggars showing other beggars where to find bread. And so as we come to the Lord's Supper and we receive the bread and the grape juice, the wine, we receive we take and we eat and we drink and we enjoy. It's given to us by Jesus. Jesus' body, this bread which is broken for us at the cross, given for you. Jesus' blood, the wine which is poured out for you and for me. And then we're going to stand and we're going to sing. We're going to sit and we're going to eat, and we're going to stand and we're going to sing. And we're going to sing this song which includes this lyric, "O church, come stand in the light." How can we sing about standing? How can we stand firm for Jesus? How can we possibly sing about that if we're like Peter? Well, let's remember we are like Peter, and Jesus stood firm for people like Peter, for you and for me. And later on in the story, we discover that Jesus reinstates Peter. And Peter is loved by Jesus. He's encouraged by Jesus. He's redeemed and rescued by Jesus. And Peter stands firm for Jesus. That's why we have Mark's gospel. We have Mark's account and biography of Jesus largely because of Peter and his ministry later on. And so tonight, I want to encourage you as you sit and receive. You receive from the one who gives to you, the one who stood firm for you, a faithful friend. It's Jesus.